The open networking movement is a long-term movement. It's a very encouraging direction, and it's one that's here to stay. What's interesting is that open networking is not just about open source or open source software. It's really about taking a vertically integrated networking stack and disaggregating that stack. And so it includes open networking hardware and open networking software. Now, what's also interesting is that as you think about disaggregating that stack, every component of that stack will now be provided by a different vendor potentially. And so it becomes extremely important when you think about vertical disaggregation to have visibility at every layer of that disaggregated stack. In the past, in traditional networking, there was not as much of a need to think about it because the entire stack was supported top to bottom by one vendor. But now, because there are multiple vendors supporting that stack, you will need visibility at every layer of that stack to be able to monitor, manage, and secure that disaggregated networking stack. It's a question that doesn't get talked about very often, but there are some security implications towards this whole open networking movement. Fundamentally, as you start thinking about disaggregating the stack, you are, in principle, opening up multiple attack vectors or multiple surfaces for security attacks. So conceivably, it would become easier for somebody to craft malware that is targeted at specific interfaces within this vertically disaggregated stack. On the other hand, what you do have now is you will actually have a much broader system of vendors who are moving very quickly to resolve vulnerabilities and provide patches. You will have a much larger user community that is focused on the same space and that can move quickly to resolve some of the security concerns. So from that perspective, it's a mixed bag. However, I think the underlying principle to all of this is that you cannot secure what you cannot see. And so no matter what measures you put in place, what is going to be very important as you start thinking about vertical disaggregation and all the different layers within the disaggregated stack is to have visibility at every layer of the stack so that you can then connect the right security appliances, the right security solutions to go address security at each of those layers within the stack. Unfortunately, this is not getting talked about as often, but it's understandable because it's a little bit early in the whole move to open networking, but it's an important part of the whole strategy behind open networking. So great points. Clearly, when you start thinking about the speeds, for example, today, if you think about 10 gigabit per second networks, forget 40 gig and 100 gig. If you think about 10 gigabits per second network, the time between packets, the inner packet gap on a 10 gigabit per second network is about 9.6 nanoseconds. Think about that. In that 9.6 nanosecond, the switch needs to be able to take a look at the packet, figure out where it needs to be forwarded to, and send the packet on its way before the next packet arrives. That leaves very little time to actually do any kind of security processing on top of the packets. For example, look at layer 4 to layer 7 information, or to be able to look for malware within the packet. And so I think when you start thinking about faster networks, the chips are getting faster, the chips are becoming lower latency, but the intelligence that is needed to go secure that traffic will necessarily move to dedicated solutions that will need to be fed with traffic from all of these different switches through a dedicated visibility fabric. And I think that provides the most robust solution over the long term to address some of the security challenges associated with a disaggregated vertical stack. So I think there are two ways to look at this. Certainly, the ability to centralize control is a big advantage of the move to open networking. The ability to manage everything from one console is a big advantage to the move to open networking. It also provides one surface vector through which you can bring the entire network down. So I think it's a bit of a mixed bag, and you have to be very careful building a security strategy on just an open networking foundation. I think there's a lot more to building a security strategy than just looking at it from an open networking perspective. The other thing to keep in mind, by the way, is that as you think about a networking stack that is being driven from an open networking perspective, again, it has a tremendous amount of advantages, but the software, for example, that goes on the stack may come from different vendors who are providing different software stacks. And depending on which vendor you get the stack from, the security posture, the hardening of the stack will vary considerably. And consequently, you're going to get a wide divergence in the security posture of all the different components when it comes to open networking. And that's something that people have to be very aware of, in tune of, and have to put in place the right infrastructure to be able to deal with that. Overall, I think it's good, right? The larger community you get behind this, the more opportunities there'll be to move the industry forward more quickly. Again, it becomes very important to realize what are the objectives of open networking and put in place the right strategy to go address this. I think there'll be standards focused on solving problems associated with network virtualization. There'll be standards and groups associated with solving the problems around orchestration, and each one will focus on their own domain of expertise. And consequently, it becomes very important to truly understand why you're moving towards open networking, what do you hope to accomplish with it, and how do you monitor, manage, and secure your open network environment. I think the fact that you have multiple groups looking at this is actually a good thing. It'll drive the industry forward more quickly. Quite frankly, in many cases, security traditionally has been an afterthought. And by the way, it's not necessarily a bad thing given where we are today. The move to open networking is still pretty new. I think we're still in the infancy of this whole movement. We've got another 10, 15 years more to go down the road, right? And the industry will evolve, but I do think it becomes important to bring the security aspect into the design stage rather than the deployment stage, right? Because security is not something that you bring in as an afterthought. It is something that you think about it from day one itself. And that has not happened so far, but the signs are there that that's changing, and people are now beginning to take security far more importantly, far more as a higher priority, and bring this into the discussion far sooner than they traditionally have been. I think we are going to see this natural push and pull between the ownership of security. You will naturally see the networking team taking on more responsibility because they are ultimately responsible for integrating all the different components and consequently dealing with the challenges, including the security challenges that these different components bring to the table. At the same time, you do have people who are focused on security that understand the fundamental nature of malware, how advanced persistent threats are getting deployed inside the infrastructure, how they propagate laterally, which many of the networking teams don't have context into. So I do think you'll see this natural push and pull, and I think ultimately the best way to go address that natural tension is to put in place an infrastructure that addresses the challenges of bringing visibility at the different layers of the stack and can still serve up the needs of all the security tools that are focused at looking at malware and threats and anomalies within the infrastructure. And I think the best way to go do that is through a dedicated visibility fabric that bridges these two different teams and provides the bridge between the operational boundaries of these organizations. What we're seeing today in security is that there is a fundamental shift. The sheer volume and magnitude of the breaches we've seen in the recent past is forcing people to rethink the model of security. The traditional model of security has been one where you actually define a perimeter using a traditional perimeter-based firewall, maybe some endpoint solutions, and make sure that the bad stuff stays outside and the good stuff is inside. That model is fundamentally broken, and the proof is there in all the breaches we've seen over the last 12, 18, 24 months. And so I think what we're seeing today is that the security industry is moving towards an acceptance of the fact that you are going to be breached or that you've already been breached. That's the mindset at which you start with. It's not about keeping the bad stuff out, but it is now coming to a model where people are saying, I have bad stuff in my infrastructure, I've got to go find that inside my infrastructure. Now, the question is, how do you do that? Because that's a big challenge. Your infrastructure is huge. You've got tens, hundreds of switches in your infrastructure. You've got hundreds, thousands of applications, workloads in your infrastructure. And the ability to look inside all of that is a big challenge. And so I think what you'll see down the road is that more and more people will gravitate towards a platform-based approach to addressing security and the threats inside your infrastructure. And that platform will provide visibility into your physical and virtualized workloads. It will provide visibility into encrypted as well as plain text traffic. It will provide visibility into packet-based data as well as flow-based metadata. And then that platform will be able to deliver all of this to a set of dedicated appliances that can then scan all of this and try to identify the threat within. And I think that's a big shift. This whole mindset about it's not just about securing a perimeter, but it's about looking within for malware is a big change that we'll see over the next 12 to 24 months.
To learn more about Gigamon's Visibility Fabric and how your organization can benefit from active visibility, please download the white paper.